deep inside, there's a huge part of me that's gone.
The horror is once you get out, trying to get back what you'd lost.
When you're on that side of the bars and there's no way, there's no hope, there's no crack, you give up.
Took away a big portion of my life, took away my life with my children.
I mean, what happened to the word investigation?
Helpless, fear, anger, and revenge, and wanting people to be held accountable for what had happened to me.
And why? Why did you do it? What possessed you to play God?
I knew my life was over right there.
Having my family taken away, everything taken away from me.
I had my life stolen away for 25.5 years for a crime I didn't commit. You can't get that time back.
Hi, I'm Kelly Fanson.
And I'm Kelly Lauzon.
And this is Real Life Wrongs, where we dive into the stories, the crimes, and the hard times of the complicated world of wrongful convictions. Join us every week as we shed light on the heart-wrenching and controversial stories of wrongful convictions by examining the system errors that put innocent people behind bars.
Episode 2, Out of the Shadows. Highlight case, Jamie Nelson. Guest, Jamie Nelson.
Imagine spending the weekend with your children. You take them out for ice cream. When you get home, you park your vehicle, and suddenly you are surrounded by police officers. They're yelling at you to get out of the car, and they rush up and press a gun against your temple. All the while, your kids are in the back seat watching the police treating their dad like a vicious criminal. You have no idea what's going on. You're as confused as your kids are. You're taken to the police station for questioning. The officers are so disgusted with you that they can't even look at you, and they call you every name imaginable. They treat you like an animal. This is when you learn what you've done. A woman that you know has filed charges against you. She says that you forcibly confined her, beat her, sexually assaulted her, and made death threats against her if she told anyone what happened. You know that all of these charges are untrue. But how do you prove that you didn't do any of these things? Well, it doesn't matter, because no matter what you say, no matter what you offer as an alibi, the police don't buy it. They make no effort to look beyond you as the bad guy. When it comes to this case, they have blinders on. You are all they see. The police make it clear to you that they have their guy and they have a credible witness. The case gets passed on to the prosecutor, and because the police are so sure that you did it, the prosecutor also believes that you did it. He wants to make an example of you. You're brought to trial, but this is a case of your word against everyone else's. You're hoping that the judge will see through the lies, but the plaintiff is very convincing. After a short trial, you're convicted for a crime that you know you didn't do. As you're let off to prison, you're left with the thought that the last time you saw your children was with an officer yelling at you and holding a gun to your head.
That's the story of Jamie Nelson, a Canadian man who spent 1,047 days behind bars at Millhaven Institute maximum security prison for a sexual assault crime that he didn't commit.
Today on Real Life Wrongs, we look at tunnel vision and how players at all stages in the justice system can become fixated on one subject. But first, the details of the crime.
The alleged victim is Kathy Fordham. When Jamie first met her, she was a friend of his girlfriend with whom he'd had a child. Jamie and his girlfriend separated, and they became involved in a bitter custody battle. Every time that Jamie would make a little bit of progress in the courts to gain more access to his son, Miss Fordham would accuse him of crimes against her. First, it was for assault, and he went to trial. He was convicted and jailed for 120 days. After his release, Jamie was granted access to his son one night a week and on weekends. But every time he went to pick him up, his ex-girlfriend would say that his son wasn't there. Jamie finally threatened court action. So she balked and she brought him his son. When he returned home with his son on the morning of April 30th, 1995, he was arrested at gunpoint. The day before, Kathy Fordham had told the police that Jamie had viciously raped and beat her 2 months earlier. She said she waited to report it because she was afraid of him. She described how he viciously bit her on the breast and claimed she had horrifying bite marks in the pattern of Jamie's teeth. But upon assessment, there was absolutely no physical evidence. They went to court. Kathy cried often. Jamie denied all allegations. The judge sided with Kathy, and Jamie was convicted of sexual assault, forcible confinement, and uttering death threats.
Okay, so tunnel vision. Kelly, what is it?
So tunnel vision is where police, prosecutors, judge, and the juries can get so focused on one suspect or one theory of the crime that they become blinded by anything else.
Okay, so let's begin at the beginning. The police, first point of contact, first on the scene. Does it start with them?
Well, what the police think, how they assess the crime, and how they interpret the evidence often affects everyone else who looks at the evidence that they've collected. And this is why it's critical for the police to look at the evidence objectively. The evidence at the scene dictates the direction of the investigation, and in cases where tunnel vision sets in, it's the opposite.
So an example could be where an investigator might rush to a decision, maybe making an assumption rather than just sticking to the evidence.
Exactly. And by allowing that assumption to guide the investigation, all further evidence that will be collected will support that point of view. And what often happens is that all of the attention is put on to this one individual, to the point that they don't even consider that there may be other possibilities.
Sounds like the forming of a very narrow and rigid theory of a crime. Being hyper-focused on one suspect doesn't sound like a very good way to conduct an investigation if you're interested in finding the truth.
No, I mean, this generally works against every principle of a good investigation. And it can get to the point that no matter what evidence they collect, they'll create a narrative that makes that evidence fit with their story, even when it clearly doesn't.
So that's clearly not in the job description. So why would the police do this? Why would they spend so much time working to make someone look guilty to get a conviction rather than working to find the right criminal?
It's not really a matter of the police making someone look guilty. It's more a matter of the police tending to think that once they make an arrest, the case is all but closed, and the suspect that they've identified has to be guilty. But this is a problem because when police decide you're guilty, you're now dealing with a presumption of guilt rather than a presumption of innocence. And this reverse presumption fuels the tunnel vision because now the police are convinced they have their guy.
Does this lead to charges being laid before the full investigation is done?
Yes. But what's important to remember is that the police aren't responsible for determining guilt or innocence. The police should have no stake in the case other than collecting all of the evidence and turning it over to the prosecutor.
The police aren't responsible for determining guilt or innocence. They should have no stake in the case other than collecting the evidence and handing it over to the prosecutor. Determining guilt or innocence is the court's job. If the police have a biased conclusion, will this then get passed on to the prosecution?
So while tunnel vision usually sets in during the investigative stage, it is easily transferred to other actors in the criminal justice system. The police are the ones who collect the evidence and who put the theory of the crime together. But the prosecutor's office will work off the information that they're given, so then this can set off a chain reaction of tunnel vision that follows the suspect through their dealings with the investigators, the prosecutors, the judges.
Let's look at the prosecution and how tunnel vision occurs there. The prosecution can form their own bias, and this can also be perpetuated through the trial process.
Right. So the prosecutor builds a theory of the crime that they want to present at trial. And this theory is obviously going to be shaped by the information that they get from the police. So you can imagine if the only information that they get points to this one person, then they're going to really quickly become focused on proving this one person's guilt. And it can also work its way into the prosecutor's work when there's a lot of public pressure to close the case. It's natural for them to want to ease public fears. And if all the evidence they have points to this one person, why bother looking any further?
Well, I'd like to believe a judge would not allow her own bias to have any bearing on an outcome. Can tunnel vision happen that way in court?
Well, let's not forget that judges are humans too, so they're no more immune to bias than any of the rest of us. Judges can get swept up in the presentation of the evidence, and they can buy into the narrative of this one person's guilt. So they may end up making rulings that permit certain evidence to be presented at trial that really isn't relevant, or they may see connections between the suspect, the crime scene, the collected evidence that may not even be there. And in worst case scenarios, you can end up with a judge who turns a blind eye to police or prosecutorial misconduct if it's been done in an effort to get the bad guy off the street.
Right. Human system, human error. Tunnel vision is the result of everyday human psychological biases. And despite their training, the police are still subject to them. When you consider the tons of new information we're exposed to every day, civilians like you and me, including police officers on the job, use shortcuts to manage the information thrown at us, at them, to help process it all.
Yeah, and one of the shortcuts is known as confirmation bias. So, what does this mean? Let's say you're trying to prove a theory. You might look for information that confirms that theory, and at the same time, you're going to avoid any information that contradicts it. So this is going to create a feedback loop, because when you're only looking at information that confirms your beliefs, you're increasing your confidence in your theory. Because as far as you can tell, everything is pointing to the fact that you're right. So in the case of an investigation, police would look at evidence in ways that support their existing belief in someone's guilt, and then it becomes increasingly obvious to them that they have the right person.
And then we can follow that up with belief perseverance, where we resist changing our opinions even when we're faced with new evidence that completely undermines our initial theory. We all do it. It's not an easy process checking in with our own beliefs because, well, they're ours. They're a bit automatic. To check your beliefs, you first have to be aware of what they are and then choose to consider other points of view. We can all observe that in ourselves and find where our own sets of principles and conditioning influence our thoughts and actions. How often do you need to be right? How often can you admit you're wrong? Of course, the police are trained to avoid these basic human traits. Right?
Yes, but they are human. And we've seen enough times with cases where tunnel vision, starting with the police, has led to a wrongful conviction.
What we need to remember is it can happen to anyone. So Jamie Nelson's case is a perfect example. And right now we're going to hear directly from Jamie. Here are some highlights of his interview with us. He speaks about tunnel vision, but also the horrific experience of his time spent in prison. So it would seem obvious to introduce you by starting with your wrongful conviction, as you know, it may be the defining moment of your life. But who is Jamie Nelson?
Well, first and foremost, I guess I'm a 54-year-old father of 5. That's who I am first and foremost. And I was that fella 25 years ago, just a couple of months ago, April 29th, when this event in my life and in my family's life happened. So I'm still that guy. I'm just 54 now, but I'm still a father. I still have those amazing kids in my life. It took forever and a day, or like the kids say, a minute, to get them back. That was another journey, but a worthwhile one. So I'm that guy. I'm Jamie. I'm a chef. I'm a sessional lecturer, and I discovered about a decade ago how easy it is for somebody to become an expert in something. And what I became an expert in was my nightmare and my story.
What's the first thing that comes to mind for you? I understand it's your story, but what comes to mind in terms of what you had to learn and what that journey was?
Well, I had to teach myself the law in a very layman's way. I knew that I had been a victim of a Stinchcomb violation, several of them, but I didn't know what a Stinchcomb violation was. I knew what
is a Stinchcomb violation?
Well, a Stinchcomb violation is when a Crown attorney does not disclose the fruit of an investigation with the defense lawyer, if it's positive or negative, inculpatory or exculpatory, either way, the Crown is supposed to share the fruit of all investigations, all interviews. And in my case, that just simply didn't happen on several occasions. So I first had to learn what a Stinchcomb violation was and how serious that was of a breach to me as an individual, and then to the criminal justice system. And then, like, how do you circumvent that? And then I had to learn, I had to become, per se, an expert in bruising, because the air quote victim in my story alleged a heinous, serious, brutal beating. And if that had happened, there should have been the telltale, visible, very detectable signs of that brutal beating. So I became an expert in bruising, just so that I knew what I would be facing later down the road in my appeal.
You don't really think about that in your life, like maybe I should become an expert in bruising.
When you're faced with having to explain away why they're not there, yet a screaming victim, a crying victim, a very impatient victim in cross and in chief, tells this horrible story, and yet an emergency room doctor and 2 triage nurses see nothing but a tiny, minuscule, aged bruise smaller than a dime. It makes you want to know what was missed and how did it all get dropped.
So it seems the criminal justice system was completely fixated on you and your guilt. And this was because she had waited so long to go seek medical observation, etc. There was no physical evidence. There was nothing other than a he said, she said story being presented at trial. But the problem is nobody was listening to what you said. So this was just a she said kind of case, correct? Like in my understanding. So do you feel that there was any objectivity throughout the criminal justice process? Was anybody listening to you any time along the way?
Absolutely not. As you know, this just wasn't a one-time experience with Kathy Fordham. I had 2 other experiences with Kathy Fordham where she alleged just all kinds of absurd stuff. So I had 2 convictions, one for an assault. I received a 60-day sentence. And then immediately after that, she alleged that I kidnapped her. I received a 120-day sentence for that. I vigorously defended myself, but at the end of the day, I was convicted. So now by the time 3 months later, I had only been out of jail for 3 months, having served the 120 days. That was my first wrongful conviction with Kathy Fordham. Now 3 months later, she's alleging this horrific, violent, brutal rape. So by the time Detective Kerr and Claroux get to my house on April 29th, they didn't give a shit what I had to say. They were just there to pick me up. They had the OPP effect the warrant of arrest. They transported me to Long Sault, Ontario, to the detachment, and I waited in a room for those 2 inept detectives to show up. One with a briefcase full of paperwork, the court folder, and the other one with manacles and chains and all kinds of stuff. I asked Detective Kerr if he would give me the chance to provide him with a polygraph. And he took his glasses off, he leaned in, and he said, no, I have no reason not to believe that she's telling me the truth.
Now, is there ever a case where you can insist that you get a polygraph? Did you just not know to the extent that you could, ask for things at that point? For anyone who's in that situation, how would you know? Just it's extraordinary enough that you said, "Can I take a polygraph?" Some people wouldn't even think to ask if they can, but
Well, here's what I've come.
Anyone's right.
Here's what I've come to learn. You can't inject yourself into an investigation. If that cop has a predetermined thought process, that there ain't nothing going to change his mind. One of the things that I love doing is I love watching interrogation clips and videos, and I love to see how skilled some police officers are. It takes them 3-4 hours to get a guy to deviate from, no, I don't want to say anything. No, I don't want to say anything. They'll spend hours trying to get the right guy to confess. But if you're trying to assert your innocence, whoa, no, I got nothing to say to you. She's already told me. So no, I was invisible.
This feels like a twist in the training, right? With the training is such that they become so good at that. But does that interfere with actually listening and hearing?
But then they've also been encouraged to become a victim of tunnel vision, because at the end of the 80s, the criminal code removed corroboration. And then at the early 90s, you have the introduction of zero tolerance policy within screening charging or charge screening. It's zero tolerance. So no corroboration, zero tolerance. Now they don't even have to do their job. Really, they don't have to gather the facts. They don't. They just have to pick up the statement. It's just handcuffed them. Wrong word, but it's handcuffed them. And, when you're a person accused of sexually motivated crimes and you're now facing that environment, you're well behind the 8 ball. Reasonable doubt and presumption of innocence are well out the window. You're gone. Charter of Rights and Freedoms, gone. Just paper, gone. So you're invisible.
Sorry, go ahead.
The first 21 days of my incarceration, I had been arraigned, but I don't think I had a bail hearing yet. I had gone through some court psychiatric assessments. Other than that, I wasn't transported out of the Ottawa Carleton Detention Center, and I was kept in a unit behind the hole, behind disassociation, behind solitary. I was kept in a cell that had nothing in it. I didn't even have a bed. I didn't have a mattress. All I had was a toilet, but it didn't have water. I had to ask for toilet paper. I had to beg for my meals for 21 days. That's how I was housed. And I hadn't been convicted of anything. I had only been accused at that point. Where were my rights? Where was me? Nobody saw me. And that is horrible. It's just horrible that can happen. A first world country, Canada, that can happen. I'm beside myself thinking about it. I really am. Because when the first 2 officers showed up, they were harsh when I was first arrested. Door open, gun to my head, get out, all kinds of threats. But then when they went to go handcuff me, I said, well, can you look at my arms? Like, I have skin grafts that have just been done. And if you cuff me, you're going to tear the skin grafts. So they said, oh, yeah, okay, we won't cuff you. So they let me sit in the back seat uncuffed. And then when Claroux and Kerr showed up, I said the same thing. Oh, can you please not cuff me? Like, look at my arms. Like, you're going to tear my grafts. Oh, yeah, okay, you're right. We won't cuff you. And then for 2 hours, they got lost trying to get from Long Sault to the 417 to get back to Ottawa. And I noticed they kept driving by this one concession that was like one concession from my house. So the only thing that was humane that they did for me that night, they had to make a deal, but it was a very humane thing. I said, hey guys, you're lost. And this is well before GPS and well before they'd go like, hey, we're lost. Can you tell us how to? So I said, if you let me stop by my house and say goodbye to my kids, because we're like one concession away, I'll tell you how to get to the highway. So they pulled in front of my house. Clarue sat next to me, and I rolled the window down, and Kerr stood on the outside by the door, and one by one he handed my children in so I could hug them and kiss them and say goodbye. And then we got to Ottawa, to the detention center, and then I was thrown into that dark room and it was like 21 days before my bail hearing. So that's how it changed, and the suddenness, but it was like subtle and just, I can't describe it. It's just really hard to describe. It's like eating something beautiful and sweet, and then all of a sudden getting to something bitter. It's just like, where did that come from? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I only asked that question because no one would ever be prepared for what happened to you.
I don't think there is a way to be prepared for something unexpected. Like, who even, we all have a plan if the house floods. We all have a plan if the house catches on fire. We have a muster point, for God's sakes, across the street. Nobody ever considers, do we have that wrongful conviction bag ready? Like, get that in the trunk,
So, well, I think in Jamie's case, the problem, and Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, was that she didn't go get she didn't get looked at by a medical professional for months after the alleged attack. So
I don't mean to interrupt, but you're right and wrong. 4 days after the alleged date, April 29th, 4 days prior to April 29th, Kathy Fordham attended the Montfort Hospital. And when she was there, during triage and through all of the process of going through emergency, she stated that she had been the victim of an assault, a common assault from her previous boyfriend. She had minimal injuries, like very slight bruising. So those were the injuries she presented to the Montfort Hospital with. But it was 4 days before the alleged date. But you're correct. She didn't later. She waited 2 months to file her complaint and then go to the hospital.
So just so I'm clear, she went 4 days before the date that she accused you.
Correct.
But then went 2 months later when she actually came forward with the accusation.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, I mean, to go
math.
Yeah. So to go 2 months later and say I was attacked, and she had said that, she'd been bitten so hard that, the skin was broken, but yet there was absolutely no scar tissue, no indication that any of this had happened. So I don't think that it was the doctors that had tunnel vision. I don't think that, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they confirmed that anything had happened, because they're just like, it's too far gone for there to be any injuries would have been healed by now, right? But it was the officers who had extreme tunnel vision in this case and took her word at face value and just said their attitude was basically like, who would lie about this? If she says that she had these injuries, then she had these injuries. And it's not uncommon for a victim to wait a prolonged period of time to seek medical assistance after an attack.
Right. And Jamie, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's very true. That's quite correct. But in my case, another thing that I had to really try to figure out, become an expert in from my trial, was they're using medical evidence at my trial that's dated 4 days before the allegation. In that report, she says, I was beaten up by my ex-boyfriend. She has these very minimal injuries. But then during my trial, 7 months later, they call the emergency room doctor, they call the two nurses, and it's the square hole round peg trick, where now all of a sudden these medical professionals are referring to their notes, reading, saying, oh yeah, this is what she attended with. This is what she attended with. This is what she was treated with. We gave her a pamphlet for domestic violence, and we gave her some outreach programs to get in contact with. But now they're sitting there listening to this vicious attack that's what she went to the hospital for. There were just no injuries. Her abdomen was clear. Her breasts, there were no crescent-shaped bites. There were no physical marks of the vicious UFC beating that she depicted. So it was just, everything was dropped.
And Jamie, you've mentioned a couple times how you had to become a master of, things that you probably never would have imagined. And I think that is, something that we're trying to convey here is that this could happen to anyone. How can we protect ourselves? Is that something that's possible, or do we have to go through it to master it? We're not all going to be lawyers or whatever we need to be to understand how it all works.
That's just it. You don't know what you don't know. And, you don't realize how steep of a slope you're climbing when you're going down that road. Like, it's the steepest slope you've ever encountered in your life. It's the tallest mountain. There are no steps. There are no handrails. It's a nightmare ride. You have front row seats. So you literally absorb it. And a lot you rely on the expert in your corner, your defense lawyer. You rely on common sense. You rely on equity in the system, like things that you all take I took for granted of. I don't know if everybody else takes it for granted, but if you think about the numbers, about 85% of people that get charged deal with the offense in a way that doesn't include a trial. They either plead guilty or they go into a diversion program or probation. There's no trial. So that leaves about 15% of charged individuals that are about ready to face a trial. 10% of those, 90% of those 15 are going to vigorously, at the end of the day, plead not guilty. So it's not like every charged person is burdening the system. Well, not here in Canada, at least. So for a charged person to make it to trial, there's a lot of work done to get there. There's preliminary hearings. There's this, there's that. There's show cause hearings. So I'm flabbergasted that my event even got past a show cause hearing. Mm-hmm. But I'm even aghast that it took me 22 days to get a bail hearing. So you just don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know. I think as Canadians, we see so many shows and documentaries that reflect the American justice system. How is it different here? Like, from going through it yourself, are there, did you learn something about that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I get asked this question every time I present, and it doesn't matter if it's to grade 12 law students at St. Pius in Ottawa or for Kelly Lauzon's class. I'm always asked, is it really genuinely depicted the way it is in the TV show Oz? That HBO show Oz. And it's like, no. If that was really the way life was in prison, there'd be no federal inmates. They'd all be dead. So they'd just kill each other. Mm-hmm. That's just Hollywood. No, there's a very strict code that inmates live by. There are 15 tenets to it, and a former great federal inmate by the name of Mickey MacArthur, he put them in his book, I'd rather be wanted than had. And I used to know them all off by heart because I lived there. But the number one rule was you just let everybody do what they're doing because they're all there for the same reason. So, you master the rules of living there. It's, no eye contact, keep your nose clean, do your programs, just try not to make friends, honestly. But it's not as it is in American fiction or on those reality shows. I think the closest depiction would be 60 Days In. where somebody from the street decides to just walk in and try their hand at jail. That's in a detention center. That's in a county bucket. That's not a federal pen. In a federal pen, everybody has the same goal. They all ultimately want to try to get out of there. So you just live your own life. You get through it.
Is it possible to have a friend in prison or to make friends, or is that just not possible?
It's not anything positive that I ever experienced. The person always, there's always a motive behind their interest in you. You either have something they want, or you have money, you have access to income, you might have access to protection, I was a brewer because I was a chef. I knew how to make alcohol. So that was my little underground economy when I was in Joyceville. I wasn't big enough to beat people up, and I created a market, and I served the market. So I had a lot of people that wanted to be close to me because I had something that they all wanted.
Feels like an exaggeration of real life, though.
Well, that's what federal custody is. It's just this little micro bubble of the world. It's like everything that you have out here. It's just behind iron and fences and gun towers. So, but nobody makes friends. You might have associates, people you roll with, people you hang with, but you certainly don't have somebody that you tell your secrets to or you trust. You just don't.
Right. Although I guess there's people who try to take on that role. That's not the topic of our episode today, but jailhouse informants and things like that, like people who are trying to get on your good side. Can you kind of just read that?
You can. Yeah, you really can. What's with all the questions? Can I grill you now? No, if somebody's being too inquisitive, they're being inquisitive for a reason. They're shopping. So, no.
Yeah.
My best attribute there was just sit down, shut up, and listen. Mm-hmm. I learned more by listening than by watching, because I couldn't see it all, but I could hear it all.
And I'm sure you've been asked this, but how do you think your experience being innocent and in prison would be different from, everyone who's in there who, has time to serve because they actually committed the crime?
My experience was 100% wholeheartedly just like everybody else's, just like Robert Baltovich's, just like Romeo Fillion's, just like William Sopanow's, just like David Milgaard's, just like Maria Shepard's. When you're innocent and wrongly convicted, you don't get a different color jumpsuit. You don't dye your hair a certain color. There's not a certain badge. You might wear your uniform differently. You might pull your pants on differently because you're an innocent person. You might live your life differently and cock your head back differently and walk with the certitude that somebody else doesn't. But nobody else really knows that you're an innocent person because you're not revealing. I never revealed to anybody what I had been convicted of. I would have been murdered. So I was what's called a second story man. I just created an event that would have been plausible had I been convicted. So I just said that I caught a guy breaking into my house, and I defended my home and my children and my wife. Unfortunately, I hurt him. So here I am.
Is that a typical story in prison?
Well, that was my story. That was mine. I'm sure there were a lot of second story men. That was another rule, of the inmate code. You never discussed your event, your charges. It was nobody's business. Everybody was there all doing the same thing, serving time. So it just, honest to God, it never came up unless somebody volunteered why they were there. You just never discussed it. Never.
I watched Struggle for Justice. It's gut-wrenching. Your description about arriving at Joyceville Institution, the body sweat, urine, feces, and fear that you described.
Oh, the fear, yeah. You can feel it. You can smell it. It's like, that static charge that it's it's just in the haze of the day, minutes before it rains.
Mm-hmm.
that's that environment, but it's all effing day.
Yeah.
Like the hair on your arms, it stands up. Like
Yep.
it just, it's one of those, putting your tongue on a 9-volt battery, that
Don't try this at home.
we all do though, but
you gotta try.
we all do. But that is literally that feeling. It's that raw static surge. You feel it, you smell it. It's got a grit, and it's got a stickiness. Like it's there. It's just there
all the time.
Yeah. Sharks are born swimming, right? And you get off this van. You just spent 5 hours on a van chained together with 8 other men. You just watched one guy get the life beat out of him. He's still breathing. He's still alive for some reason, but he's still alive. And the guys in the van driving and pointing it don't care. The only time they stopped was to get coffee and go for a urine break. They didn't open the van to see if he was okay. And then we pull in, and it's like, oh my God, now you're one of 600 sharks. So it's just an instant.
Did you have the feeling right away that you were going to continue to fight and you would be free?
I had every expectation that when I went to my very first Court of Appeal hearing, which was November 27th, 1997, at the former county courthouse in Kingston, it's been fitted to be the in-person Court of Appeal. So that's when there's 2 streams, the solicitor and then in person. So at the time, I was an in-person appeal. I was representing myself, so I had to do that in that courthouse. I thought I was going to go home that day. I was going to tuck my kids in, make love to my wife, skinny dip. I'd had to find a pool or a lake, but I was going to skinny dip. But it just didn't happen because somebody else went to court that day, and it was Paul Bernardo, and he was appealing his Scarborough rape convictions. So he thought it would make a difference in light of what he was going to be facing with his current convictions or charges. So because he was in the building, the staff had so much concern for his safety that none of the other inmates had the opportunity to go to court that day. So I had to defer it, and probably for about another year. And then that happened again. And then when it happened the third time, I brought an accomplished solicitor on board by the name of Todd Ducharme, and he became my champion and carried my flag.
If you could walk us through the steps you had to take to clear your name. From what we have talked about, it's a long, time-consuming process. And at any point, did you feel like giving up the fight?
Not once. Not once. The hardest part, the longest part for me was acquiring my transcripts, because you can't really advance an appeal without the transcripts, because you need to be able to cite exactly what your points are, where the flaws were, where this happened, where that happened. So that took probably a year. I filed my in-person appeal within 14 days of being convicted because I wanted to start that clock. And then once I got to federal custody, I had to make the toughest decision I think I made throughout the whole journey. And that was the one to go from prison to prison. And I was about halfway through my sentence, and I decided, because I had my transcripts now at this point, but now they're locked in a storeroom because I couldn't have access to them on my range, because inmates could enter my cell, acquire my transcripts, and see what I had been convicted of, and I would be murdered. So the guards wouldn't let me have the transcripts while I was on a general population range. So I went to my case management officer and I said, I need to go to the hole. I need to go to segregation. And he just laughed at me. And I called him everything but a white man, and started to break things in his office. like just flip things off his desk so that I could get his goat, but he just wasn't biting, and he sent me back to my cell. So I picked a fight, and it was a pretty substantial fight. I got into a pretty good fight, which got me into disassociation, which was a baby step to the whole, to segregation. And then from there, I just refused to leave. And they sent me to work boards and to psych boards and to this board and to that board. And before you knew it, I finished my sentence there. But I was able to have my transcripts where I was able to really focus on my appeal, so that when I got to that last opportunity at the Court of Appeal as an inmate, when I passed the baton on to Todd Ducharme, I passed on 3 banker boxes of what I thought was the blueprint to my miscarriage of justice. And he took that box, and I think it was the first time since 1972 that a Crown working for the Attorney General conceded an appeal. My appeal took less than 4 minutes. It was over in 3 minutes and 41 seconds. Mm-hmm. So it took 6 years.
It's barely a blink.
It took 6 years to climb the stairs to Osgoode Hall and get into that building, and it was over in 3 minutes and 41 seconds. But there was a lot of steps and a lot of slips and a lot of falls and a lot of anger and a lot of tears, but never regret, just always that determination to just continuously move forward.
Mm-hmm.
I had to. Nobody else was going to vindicate me or clear my name. The truth would have sat in a box forever had I not fought for myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a tough lesson.
It's a hard lesson.
Yeah.
It's a valuable lesson. But because I've endured it and because I've experienced it, I haven't squandered that. And I've shared my story at every opportunity that I have. In the certainly in the right venue, like with Professor Lauzon and with Professor Catherine Campbell at University of Ottawa. I could list a few more, but I look at it like it's the legacy that I have, is to share the story, because that's where you get the opportunity to become the living lesson. And for those that are going into the field of criminal justice, policing, the court system, law, they get an opportunity to hear my story. And I don't think it's one you forget. I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I don't think you can forget it.
So many pieces of yourself must have felt missing through the years. Can you speak to that?
That was a really hard decision as well. Almost as tough as deciding to go into the hole. I watched all the men around me, and I just listened to them at night and crying and sobbing on their pillows because they couldn't get a hold of their kids on the phone, or because they waited for 6 hours to get their kids on the phone, and then the phone got yanked out of their hands. I saw all of those guys go to visits, and within months they just stopped going. And I realized what was happening. The unlocked person of the relationship has moved on, and the locked up person in the relationship has nowhere to go. So, most of those federal inmates, they lose contact with their family and their loved ones and their kids quite soon and quite quick. So I decided to kind of mind trick myself. And I literally convinced myself that I was the only person that survived a house fire. And I held on to that because I realized that I had to prioritize my intentions, my movement forward, every step, almost every breath. So I couldn't be the dad, the husband, the father, the chef, the son, and the inmate, and the innocent guy trying to survive to be proved innocent. I just couldn't do it all.
Did you have any idea you had that strength in you?
Not until I needed it. And not until I needed it. I don't think you look for it until you need it. I think we can all speak to that to some level or to some degree, because we've all faced adversity in our lives. It doesn't have to be a nightmare in a courtroom. It could be a nightmare in a doctor's office. So yeah, everybody finds strength. You just don't know where you're getting it from, but it's just there. And it's will, I never believed that hope would get me through anything. It's, hope is just it's a belief mechanism, so I needed something a little more concrete, and I hope I get through this. I needed to be the architect to get through it. So sometimes it was easy. Sometimes the days just fluttered away, but those were the rare days. You normally felt the day minute by minute, hour by hour, segments. You break everything down into really manageable segments. That's kind of how you eat an elephant, right?
Yeah.
One bite at a time. So
do you believe you could endure anything now?
No, because I don't know what anything is. Like I know how tall of a mountain I can climb. I know how fast I can ride a motorcycle. I know how fast I can go downhill on my road bike. But I know I would never want to go through that experience again. Mm-hmm. I love the thrill I get chasing unknown. Like, how fast can I go downhill on this bike? I'll do it every time just to try to go faster. But I don't think I would ever willingly want to try to experience a wrongful conviction again. It's just.
Were you? Mm-hmm.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. Were you always like that you wanted to push the limits? See how far you could go?
I've kind of been programmed and wired that way. I'm the son of a soldier. I would consider that a privilege. I watched my dad put a uniform on every day and go out the door and just do his job for all of us. And I thought I was just like every other kid in the world. I didn't know until I was like 14, and it was the first time I didn't live on a military base. It was the first time where's your dad's uniform? Oh, my dad's an accountant. What the hell's an accountant? I thought everybody's dad was a soldier. So no, I chased the same arc of excitement that my dad did. Go higher, go faster, just don't be a bystander, take action. There's lots of time for sitting. That's when you're dead. So, just make a difference. No, I've always been like that. 4 days after I had been exonerated and cleared my name, and now Kathy Fordham is in court facing sentencing for utter death threats and utter death threats and something with a weapon. And the weapon was a 6-foot sword. So she was in court, and her intentions were to switch lawyers. So we're all sitting in court, and there was myself, my cousin Chris, Marie, and 7 or 8 other men that had all been accused of Kathy Fordham. Like, we filled the row, and the judge walked in, and it was Judge Fraser, the very judge that convicted me.
Did your jaw drop? Did you know? Or
I started to just vibrate and tremble. Like, my cousin Chris had to put his arm around me. Like, not that I wanted to react or jump out of the chair. I just like, oh my, why is he here? And he just looked at me and very deeply nodded. Didn't say a word. He just eye contact, like lasers right to me, and he just very deeply bowed his head, and then he didn't even sit down, and he ordered Kathy Fordham to her feet. He said, "You stand up."
Before you continue, was that moment when he looked at you, was that a powerful moment for you when he?
Yes, it was, because to this day that's been the only acknowledgement of a wrong that I've received.
That's formally. Very powerful.
Oh, it was huge. It was huge. It makes my heart sing when I think about that moment. It was fleeting. It was 3 seconds. But he just said, "You stand." And she looked like me, and boom, she stood, and he recused himself. And he said, "It's come to my attention that I've dealt with you in a former matter where you pretended to be a victim." He used the word pretended to be a victim. For the first time, somebody followed the rules. He recused himself.
Yeah.
So it's a very powerful moment for me. And then to see her get convicted and sentenced to 6 months.
6 months.
And at that time, it was a sentence that was going to make her spend Christmas in jail. And I was elated that she was going to have to spend Christmas in jail, because as a father, experiencing what I did when I did it, my children were 5 to 1 with a set of twins in there. So I missed 6 Christmases, 6 wonderful Christmases. So I kind of was over the moon when I did the math. Yeah. I was following her down the courthouse, and I told her I would send her a bag of oranges. Well, that's what the inmates get when you're in jail.
Oh,
The
is
staff
that
give
it?
you a bag of, yeah, you get a bag of oranges.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Why is that? What's the significance? Because every year I put an orange in my kids' stockings. So what is that? What am I saying?
My parents used to do that too. I think that was a German thing. But no, I think the staff just gave everybody 5 or 6 oranges because, the smart ones would pool them and make booze.
I see.
Yeah. The idiot sat there and ate his orange. Moving forward, once the minute I left that institution, when my father picked me up, I knew that I had to do everything I could to leave that behind. But that was a struggle, because like an onion, everything's a layer. So it built up layer by layer. So I had to shed it layer by layer. I had rough patches, rough moments. I almost got charged with assault a few times when I was first released because, I'd get overwhelmed in a lineup at a Tim Hortons, and somebody would bump me. And I'd push the guy 4 feet, and if he looked at me, I'd want to stomp on him. That was prison. That was inmate Nelson. Like, I wasn't inmate Nelson anymore. So I had to really remind myself every day, 6 or 7 times a day, every time I walked by a mirror, and I had to just consciously want to not be the guy that was looking in that mirror a month ago. And that was hard. It took a long time. It took a long time for me to just be able to turn right. When you're in federal custody, everything's designed that the inmates move left. And it's like that so that it's easier for the guards to see when something's askew. So when I got released, like my favorite store that I wanted to go to, a little Pinto store, 2 blocks down the road to the right. But for me to get there, it was a 45-minute walk because I had to leave and go left and then just keep making left turns until I could walk straight. It was mind-numbing, but that took a long time. And I'm laughing about it now, but wow, it took a long time.
It's my favorite story.
Yeah.
Conditioning.
Where are you going? To the store. I'll be back in an hour. The store's 2 minutes away. Be back in an hour. So I just leave. Yeah. And then it took a while for me to smooth off the hard points, like the aggression and just the instant need to respond, and retrain myself that not everything's a threat and not everybody's trying to harm me, or there's a reason why that guy's walking up to me. He wants to talk to me. He's not here to engage me in a fight or try to take my life. So that was hard. Yeah, it's like a water tower in a small community. You see the big white tower, the beacon shooting up in the sky. Well, that's the wrongly convicted guy. But what you don't see when you drive by it every day is the conduit network of pipes and just everything that that tower connects to. That's what a wrongful conviction affects, not just the person that goes to the cell, but every collateral member of the family. So they all had to heal and own it. And, you can't unring a bell.
Have your children shared any of their thoughts, feelings, reactions to your absence while you were serving your sentence?
Oh, yeah. It's been a hard thing to have to, it's going to sound stupid coming out of my mouth, but it's been a hard thing for Marie and I to have to do, but to tell the children the truth and to educate them of what happened. Because of what happened and the pressures and the stresses of it and how it affects just an individual, a person, it's all different. Like, I had to deal with it as the inmate, as the accused person, and Marie had to do it as the person trying to hold everything together. Rent, bills, groceries, babysitters, jobs, transportation. It's a nightmare. It's a burden. And on 2 occasions, the CAS were invited in to my family's life. The first time they were in and out within 3 months. But then the second time, they apprehended the children. And at the end of that process, there were without access orders. So for the longest time, Matthew, Melissa, and Riley specifically were under the impression that mom was a crack whore and I was a bank robber. This is your life. Deal with it. Sorry, you're in the system now. Hey, didn't somebody adopt you? Be happy. So,
and did they spend several years believing this, or were they at any point told mom's not a crack whore, dad's not a bank robber?
They firmly believed it until Struggle for Justice.
Wow.
Which was what year?
2010,
9?
I believe.
Right.
2009, I believe. So, yeah, Matthew and Melissa, I believe, were 17 when they found it, and Riley, 14. And, wow, okay. So mom wasn't a crack whore and dad wasn't a bank robber. Wow, okay. Your family gives you second chances, and we give our family second chances, and those second chances are endless. So, you just keep trying, and you just keep massaging something that's horrible until it's tolerable. And eventually you can, it's bearable. So it just took a long time.
Together.
We all did it together. And, ironically, when Matthew and Melissa were 17, we still weren't supposed to be seeing them because they had to be 18 because of the without access order. But we kind of were just flaunting the rules at that point. We just didn't care. So go Facebook. But
yeah.
Because of that, it involved a lady by the name of Kim Ward from the Cornwall CAS, and she was a family reconciliation officer with the CAS. And I couldn't believe somebody had the brilliance to jam those words together. Family reconciliation officer. And what a beautiful, brilliant lady she is, because she came all the way up to Hamilton so we could break the rules. And Marie came all the way up from Ottawa. And Christina came up from wherever she was. She was on one of her plenaries or she was in school. And we just had an incredible 5-day weekend in the hotel that I worked with. And it was the first time that I ever saw anybody from the CAS want to push us together rather than pull us apart. So we took advantage of the brilliant moments, and then we've just really endeavored and worked hard since. And we are where we are, which is incredible.
I just want to share my screen for a sec because you had sent this.
That's yesterday's trail ride.
Yeah, you'd sent this photo to Kelly, and I just want you to, talk about sort of why it speaks to you.
Well, I was doing that ride yesterday, getting ready for today, and it's called the Fireman's Trail, and you have to be kind of agile on a bike to do it because it's very twisty and turny, and it's just one of my treats. And I got to this spot, and I must have been traveling down that stretch for about 40 or 45 feet, and I just wow, this is kind of impressive. It was dead quiet and beautiful and spooky. And I thought that just so encapsulates what we're going to be talking about. But at the end of that trail was beautiful light. And, I just kept going towards the light. But along the way, I took that picture. So, yeah, it speaks to everything.
I think it's just a great representation of your journey, right? That like it's rough and it's
twisty and turny.
Yeah. And it can be dark and it can be, you don't know what's at the end of you don't know what's at the end of the tunnel, but you think that there's some light there. So you keep pushing to get to the end. Like this speaks volumes to me. When you sent it to me, I was just like, wow, this is it, without being anything legal or, a courthouse or a courtroom or a prison. This is 100% your journey.
Thank you for saying that. And wow, you're right. You really are. I look at that and in my perspective, the reason there's a path is because of the mill guards.
Absolutely.
Why is that? Explain that.
Well, because they did it first.
Mm-hmm.
And they fought a long and twisty and turny and arduous path to get the justice system and the public to admit that there are errors that can be and have been made. And, we need to acknowledge that and own that.
Oh, for sure. There's, sorry for getting emotional, but no two wrongful convictions are ever the same. They're not. But we all go through the same thing. And that path, and the mill guards and the Truscotts and the Sopanows, it's just, they didn't know where they were going either. But they had the courage to follow the path. And there weren't any forks either. Like, it's just one path. So, like, when you're on it, you're just on it. And it's front row seats. So it all comes down to courage and fear. And appreciating fear and understanding fear and facing it. But at the end of the day, you get to the end of the path. And you just get there one pedal at a time. Yeah.
There's so much to learn from Jamie's story and from Jamie himself. He found a way to survive in prison, to reunite with his children, and now in helping others by sharing his story. And hearing his account of what happened to him, we have to consider the social climate at the time of his case. So let's Scooby-Doo sequence the mid-90s. Scooby-Doo. What's happening under all those shoulder pads? The victims' rights movement was gaining steam, and it had succeeded in making some important changes to the criminal justice system. But in doing so, victims and the police were now put into a different kind of working relationship. The police were now required by law to share information about the investigation and provide support and consult with victims.
And while this was an important step in recognizing the rights of the victim, this new working relationship often led officers to develop an emotional attachment with the victim. And then this pushed the investigators to close a case so that they could do justice for the victim. At the same time that this was going on, zero tolerance policing, which we may also know as mandatory charging, was on the rise. And what this meant was that in all cases where abuse was present, officers had to lay charges whether the victim wanted to or not. So with the rise of the victims' right movement, the police didn't want to doubt or question the complainant, even when she claimed the attack happened months before.
It's unbelievable that there were no physical signs to confirm, no evidence to confirm or to discredit her story. But officers may have thought that they had to accept her word at face value. And as you say, with the rise of mandatory charging, someone had to be arrested. It obviously wasn't going to be her, so that left Jamie.
And because of these two developments, you could say that the blinders were instantly put on the investigators because there was no investigation conducted into the allegations. I mean, there was no investigation beyond the interrogation that Jamie faced at the station, but it wasn't really much of an interrogation because Jamie denied everything and the officers assumed he was lying. So with nothing more than Kathy's word, the police were convinced that Jamie was their guy.
And there it is. The police didn't look into any other possible leads or suspects. They also didn't consider any other possible scenarios. They just made sure all of the evidence supported their belief in Jamie's guilt. Nobody likes to have stories made up about them. Nobody wants to be misunderstood. Nobody wants to be accused of something they didn't do, but people talk and people have their versions of the truth based on their perceptions of the world. And hey, we all have opinions and we all have our perceived truths, but a false accusation is still false and tunnel vision is still a narrow view. And, you know, if we all have a tendency to do that, then so do players in our justice system.
Yeah. And in Jamie's case, the victim had completely fabricated all charges. And she did it in an attempt to help her friend, who was Jamie's ex-partner. And it was to help her gain sole custody of their son. So she went to the police. She was fearful. She was crying. And the police bought it. Once she gave her version of the events, the police didn't even bother looking for anyone else. They helped the prosecutor build a case against Jamie. No doubt, the sensational and graphic accusations made by a female victim drove the police down a path where they only had their sights on Jamie. They presented their views of Jamie to the prosecutor, who sought to make an example out of him. And then the judge shared this view, and because of this hyper-focused investigation, Jamie was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit.
And after serving his sentence, Jamie finally found himself in the Ontario Court of Appeal before 3 judges. Jamie's defense team had learned that it was impossible for the attack to have happened on the date the complainant claimed. After reading documents submitted by Jamie's appeal lawyer and a lawyer for the Crown, both of whom asked for an acquittal, the judges said they didn't even need to hear the submissions. It was clear that Jamie deserved an acquittal. And in less than 5 minutes, Jamie was exonerated of all charges. So what were these documents? While Jamie was in prison, the complainant continued to make similar accusations against other men. While she used her position as the leader of a group home to make false claims against men for breaches of court orders, her false claims didn't stop there. She went so far as to press rape charges against another man with almost the same details as Jamie's case. She had alleged that 2 other men had viciously beat her, but unlike Jamie, these men produced more concrete alibis. Finally, the complainant's credibility began to falter. It was admitted at the appeal that there were many instances during the original trial that should have raised, at the very least, a reasonable doubt about Jamie's guilt. But we can only guess that the effects of tunnel vision were so far-reaching that no one could see the holes in the complainant's story at the time. But thankfully, with fresh eyes looking at the case, these holes became glaring to anyone looking at the evidence.
So, where is Jamie now? During his time in prison, he lost access to all of his children. 3 of them were put into foster care, and they were ultimately adopted. He wasn't permitted to contact them until their 18th birthdays. And now, he's reconnected with all of them. And he's a proud grandfather of 2. He's a good friend, a good father, and he's an impactful speaker. He's living a quiet life in Southern Ontario, but he makes his way up to visit when he can.
You know, it's infuriating that Jamie didn't receive compensation for his wrongful conviction, and yet he seems to have accepted that.
Yeah, Jamie's strength never ceases to amaze me, and his story is always inspirational. He's shared it over 400 times, and he does this to help raise awareness about the reality of wrongful convictions. He does it so that we can all be aware of how easily this can happen, but especially to remind us that it can happen to anyone. It could happen to you.
Yeah, we always like to look at where our justice system can do better. Tunnel vision is a big problem. What's being done or needs to be done?
So I think increased education and training are probably the biggest keys in making any meaningful changes. Officers aren't educated on wrongful convictions, the possibility of wrongful convictions, or what leads to them. Most of them don't even know what tunnel vision is. My sister is an OPP officer, and when she was at police college, OPC, for training, she couldn't help but tell me that none of the recruits that she talked to had any idea what tunnel vision was or what it even meant. Pretty much every time she brought it up, they looked at her like she was some kind of weirdo just for mentioning it.
Yeah, I find that hard to believe that, in today's day and age, that they're not even aware of it. Like, if current police training doesn't inform recruits on how to avoid tunnel vision or how to recognize when it occurs, like, if that's not within the realm of what a police officer's duties are, to look out for those sort of things as they serve and protect, I would think that it would be just an important element to learn how to not let your own opinion interfere with the evidence.
I would agree with that. And while training and education are important, I think we need to go a little bit further than that. And I mean, it's almost like we need a shift in professional cultures. Police need to be reminded that it isn't their job to put the bad guy in jail. Their job is to collect the evidence, not to push for conviction. The prosecutors need to be reminded to keep a safe distance from the police to ensure they're looking at the case objectively. It's their job to present the evidence to the court in a way that seeks a just outcome.
Well, have an opinion, but don't offend anyone. Make up your mind, but stay open to possibilities. Stand for something, but not too high. Be right, but not righteous. Respect the opinion of others. Challenge your own beliefs, but never forget your own values. It's a delicate balance. We're human. Our minds are a miracle, but we don't yet fully understand how the damn things work. The world of wrongful convictions is a living hell for individuals who end up in it. And believe it or not, it could happen to anyone. Know the law, know how to look for flaws in the system, understand how marginalization works, and most of all, talk about it. Thanks for listening. I'm Kelly Fanson.
And I'm Kelly Lauzon.
For excerpts and additional information about our podcast and the world of wrongful convictions, follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. You can watch video portions of our podcast on YouTube and Instagram. And if you'd like more information, visit our website, reallifewrongs.com. Drop us a line.
All of us could falsely confess to something.
They blew it all out of proportion, and they got away with it.
Even a country like Canada has people who are charged and convicted of crimes they didn't commit.
There's innocent people who are going to die in prison.
I can't get back the time that they took from me.
And I was just left wondering, what the hell is happening?
I knew my life was over right there. That's when my life ended.
They're changing the story that I told them to match to what really happened.
I was just incarcerated for 37 years for somebody else's crime.
That what happened to me could easily happen to anybody.
Real Life Wrongs is produced by Kelly Fanson, edited by Alex Glutch, promotional materials by Jamie Norrie.